Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of JP's Budget Collecting. At least that's the name I think we're going to go with. Trying to look for something a little better than just Jason P. So, still thinking about it, but I think that's where we're going. This episode was originally going to be about how I got back into collecting in 2018 and just highlight some of the books from last year. But as I was thinking about what I wanted to do for that, I realized that I actually wanted to tell the story of how I got into comic books to begin with. And so we're going to go down that road instead. As a kid, I really wasn't into comic books. I was kind of a big Star Wars fan. I mean, I knew about superheroes and comic book characters, mostly from reruns of Super Friends and SpiderMan and His Amazing Friends and Batman and Robin showing up on Scooby-Doo cartoons. So just a little bit from the cartoons, but I really wasn't that big into the characters or into the comic books until this came out. And I was 11 when the original Batman came out, and I loved this movie. It was the first time that I really, I'd watched the Superman movie as a kid, and I liked it, but it really didn't hook me into Superman, but Batman hooked me. And it was after this that I started actually kind of seeking out comic books to read about the characters. And but as a kid, I didn't really have much of an allowance. I definitely didn't have money to spend on comics. So what I would do is when my mom would go to the grocery store, you'd go into the store and there'd be a little magazine section to one side and then all the checkout aisles. And then you would go further in and kind of go around to actually get to the groceries. So my mom would actually I would just go into the magazine area, go to the back where the spinner racks were, and read comics while my mom went and got groceries. And you think about that now, and in this day and age, you would never leave your 10, 11, 12-year-old to go do that while you were getting groceries. But back then it was no big deal. I mean, I was always there when she got back. And but that's how I took in comic books. I would read them and just put them back in the rack. And that's how I read The Death of Superman and Bane breaking Batman's back, and got super confused during the whole Spider-Man clone saga because I didn't see every issue. So it was like, what the heck is going on? Who's who? And I would read X-Men and basically anything that had a cover that I was even slightly interested in. So that's how I took in comics through, at the grocery store and doing something similar in the bookstore after I could drive on my own. And so until I got a little bit older, that was really how I took in comics. And I really wasn't hooked on any particular characters or anything until this came out. And this is Batman the Animated Series. And as you could tell by my shirt, I'm a huge fan. And it really changed, even though I was older and I wasn't supposed to like cartoons at that point. I never stopped liking cartoons. But Batman the Animated Series really changed the way I thought about these characters. It changed my fandom. It really hooked me into Batman as a character and all the, and Batgirl and Robin and Nightwing. And it really just hooked me into those characters in a way I'd never been before, even from the movie. And then, if you remember, also at the time, there was a Spider-Man cartoon that was out. And it wasn't as good, but it was still pretty good. And it kind of hooked me into Spider-Man. And those are really what sort of cemented my fandoms in terms of being a Bats and Spiders guy, were those two cartoons. But still, even when those were out, I really wasn't collecting comic books. I was reading them and putting them back. And it wasn't until I got to college and I had a buddy who collected that I even discovered, even though I'd lived just north of Columbia my whole life, and then was going to Mizzou, and had been in Columbia countless times, that Columbia had a comic book store. He took me in there one day, into Rock Bottom Comics in Columbia, Missouri, and it was like, there's a whole store dedicated to comics, and I just had no idea. And while we were there, the book that hooked me, that caused me to get a pull, and actually made me buy comics and not just cheat and read them in the bookstore or in the grocery store, was this book, Nightwing #1. And this series is what cemented for me. Nightwing will always be my favorite character. This book was super important to me at the time. It was the first book that I like set up as a pull and didn't want to miss any issues. And it really goes back to, I think, I really connected with Nightwing at the time because I was just entering college. I was out on my own for the first time, trying to find my way in the world. And this story is all about him breaking away from Batman completely. Well, not completely, but moving to Bloodhaven, having his own town to protect, and trying to really be a hero on his own merits and away from Batman. And I just really connected to it in a way that I haven't really connected to a book before or since. And it kind of cemented Nightwing will forever be my favorite character just because of that. So that was the first book I wanted to talk about. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Kingdom Come. And boy, if it's not the easiest read, it's kind of a strange book. But it was the first book that told me comics could be more than just like superhero stories and superheroes beating up bad guys and that kind of stuff. That it was that it was art, the Alex Ross art and the way they told the story. And it was just that it was the first time that I got hooked into comics as a medium and a way to tell stories more than just on a deeper and bigger level than what I thought they could be before. And it's a book I always remember as being, it just was important to me for those reasons. I remember just being a big deal and loving that, like, not understanding that, the art could look like this. And it just made me connect to comics on a completely different level than I had before that. The next book I'm going to talk about is JLA #1. And this is a book that at the time was a big deal. It was, like Grant Morrison writing the Justice League, and people were just like crazy about this story. And I remember for the first time, it was really the first time I connected with the Justice League and the DC universe beyond the Batman family in a big way. Like, I'd read some Superman stuff. I'd read a little bit of Wonder Woman stuff, a little bit of Green Lantern before that. I never really read Flash or Aquaman. Heck, I didn't even know who Martian Manhunter was before this. And just these stories and the first story with the White Martians, and then later the Tower of Babel. They were just really big stories, and I really enjoyed them, and it just connected me to the larger DC universe in a way I hadn't been before. And it was funny, I was going back through this, and I rebagged all of my old books this year when I got back into collecting, because they hadn't been bagged in forever, changed out in forever. And the sticker on this was still $15. I paid $15 for this originally, and now it's a $2 book. But so it was just a book that's I still connect with as being important to me. But it's kind of funny that book being important, because they're, my collection, what I have left, there's almost no books that have any value. But they all have a lot of importance to me just from when I collected. There's just not a lot of value necessarily in my collection. But the next book I'm going to talk about is not necessarily the book itself. This is Batman 567, which is the first appearance of Cassandra Cain. But I really just kind of pulled this out at random, because this is what I really want to talk about is this, the No Man's Land. And the Cataclysm before it and No Man's Land was the first time that I got into a bigger story and across multiple titles, and I had to have everything related to No Man's Land. And it was just, it connected with me in a way. This wasn't Batman fighting the Joker. This was Batman fighting an earthquake and trying to save people in a way that it was bigger than him. He didn't know what to do, and he couldn't just punch it in the face and fix it. And if you've never read this, I would actually recommend it. I think it still holds up. It was a really good story, and it just was a story that was the first time I really got into a bigger kind of epic storytelling that I don't feel like they really do much then or even now. Like, they do crossovers, but I don't feel like they do like something of this scale. This went on for a couple of years across all the titles, and it's just something that to this day is important to me. I got a few more books left. Before I go in, I'm going to point out just a little bit here behind me, that is, you'll notice that the books kind of behind me will change from video to video, and they'll typically be something connected with the video, or maybe they'll just be covers I like, or something along those lines. But these are two other books that like I really connect with from that time, but aren't necessarily, I'm not necessarily going to talk about. You know, it's just the first appearance of Harley in the DC comic universe, and then the Nightwing and Batgirl issue of Birds of Prey. And Nightwing and Batgirl are two of my favorite characters, and there's two books that are kind of important to me that I kind of put up there. But if you watch that space, you'll kind of see as we go through these videos, there'll be like rotating books there. So the next book didn't come out until I was in grad school, and this is, everybody will recognize the 9/11 issue of SpiderMan. And I still remember, like, I was sitting in my advisor's office when the secretary for the school came in and was like, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. And we're like, what? And I remember like leaving his office and going home and turning the TV on and seeing the second plane hit the Trade Center and seeing the towers come down and not knowing what to do or how to feel or any of it. And to this day, I remember the things that like kind of brought me out of that were, you know, watching the sporting events, watching the baseball games and in New York, and watching the football games and how people rallied around those. And then this book came out, and I just remember like reading it and being like how tied Spider-Man was to New York. And, you know, I just felt like Marvel got it. They understood what people were going through with this, and how, you know, it was bigger than Spider-Man, and yet he was just doing what he could to help. And to this day, it's one of my favorite Spider-Man stories. And it, you know, it also made me realize that comics could be more than just like cheap entertainment. I guess they could tell stories that were important to people. And so this book is just, it's always got a special place in my heart, at least, for what it, you know, what it was about and what it like helped people get through. So the next book's going to be a completely different change of tone, from something serious to something that was just fun. And you guys are going to be like, Danger Girl, really? And you got to remember, I was in college at the time. I was a big J. Scott Campbell fan. I read Gen 13 just for his art. I didn't even particularly like the story. I just enjoyed the art. And I remember getting this, and it was basically, oh, there's pretty girls on the cover. But I remember it just being a lot of fun. And it was the first time I really ventured beyond kind of the DC Marvel typical stuff into something that was a little different. And, you know, I reread it last year, and it held up. It was fun. It was, I mean, it's not serious. It's, you know, they're sensationalized, but it was just a lot of fun. And I still feel like these characters had potential that like nobody's really ever tapped to be more than just like the, you know, the cheesecake kind of thing that Campbell made them, because it's just something that was there that I really enjoy about these books. So, so it made my list, even if it was kind of, you know, kind of a little bit silly. But next up is a trade, and this is the first trade of Ultimate Spider-Man. And the reason I picked this is because the trade is how I discovered this issue. This came out during the transition as I was moving from college to grad school, and I didn't really see it at the beginning. I was like, oh, another retelling of Spider-Man. And I decided to give it a shot via the trade, and I loved it. You know, they modernized Spider-Man in a way that I could really connect to. It made more sense than a lot of the stuff that, like, you'd go back and read some of the old Spider-Man from the 60s, and it's like, oh, they would never hire this kid to be a photographer and that kind of stuff. But doing web stuff and like how he got in with, and I just connected with it in a way that I hadn't connected with Spider-Man for a while at that point. And I just love these. I read these for a long time. Eventually I kind of faded out of them when I came back here and faded out of comics, period. And it sounds like I kind of faded out at the right time because I know toward the end people aren't as happy with where the story went, even before the death of Peter Parker and that kind of stuff. But this was a book at the time that really like got me back into Spider-Man at a time that I was kind of fading from Spider-Man. So I wanted to make the list. The last book is kind of the last gasp of keeping me into comics after I left grad school. When I came back from Virginia and I moved to rural Missouri, there was no comic book stores anywhere near me. But on a visit home, to visit my parents, I went by the comic shop and I discovered Hush, Jim Lee doing Batman. And like, I went out of my way till the end of this story to pick up the issues. I would say this is the double feature. There were already several issues out when I first discovered it. So I got the double feature instead of the original 608 or 609. But I collected all of these through the end of the Hush storyline. And it was just the last story that kind of kept me hooked. And so I kept collecting till I got to the end of this. And then that was kind of it. It just had become too hard. I hadn't to try to keep track of what was going on. I couldn't really set up a pool. I never knew when I was going to be there to get books. And so I just kind of walked away from them at that point. And I would say that to that point, even then, I kept a bunch of my books from then, but I got rid of a bunch of them. I got rid of a bunch of them when I first left Mizzou and went to Virginia Tech. And then I got rid of a bunch of them again that I didn't haul back from Virginia. I probably kept about half the books I originally had, maybe from that time period. And the rest I got rid of. I mean, I got rid of my complete... I know I had a bunch more Spider-Man books than I have now from that time. I had the whole beginning run of the first Deadpool series. Kind of wish I had some of those back. Number 1 particularly, I think, has a little value, but... and there wasn't many books from then that did. But I was always... Even though I kept my books and I kept them I bagged and boarded them and I kept them in good condition and I tried to protect them the best I could. I was always a reader. I wasn't a collector. I never went out of my way to try to buy back issues unless it was related to the story I was reading. So that was kind of me as a collector then. I'm going to have another part of this that will go into a little bit of the interim of how I kind of stayed with comics here and there, but didn't really collect, and then how I got back in and last year. But that'll be in part 2. Thanks for joining me, and I will talk to you next time.